Um, my name is Jen Ranley. I am the Outreach Program Director for the Division of Water. And yeah, we're, grateful for the opportunity to meet with you all today. So you can see on the slide there, we have a team of 5 of us from the Division of Water who are going to split up this presentation today, share with you more about the work that the division does, and hopefully clarify some potential issues, answer questions you may have, and for us, share the resources that are available through the work that we do. So we will get into some of the nitty-gritty of all of that. As Amy said, if you have questions along the way, feel free to pop them in the chat and we will answer them as we can. And yeah, we'll get started. So the Division of Water, you may be wondering about what we do and what issues we have with water. So we are related for the diverse tasks related to assessing and managing Indiana's water. I will clarify, though, that we do not do water quality. Wetlands and water quality go through the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. So the DNR deals with water quantity issues. So those are the topics that we'll be covering today, such as flooding, drought, anywhere in between, water that's surface water, groundwater, things like that. So that culminates in, or the way that presents is our office handles permitting in floodways and on public freshwater lakes. We will detail a little bit more about what that jurisdiction looks like, what a floodway is, how we distinguish those things. Groundwater assessments and availability. So very hot in the news in the legislature right now, but has been historically a function of the Division of Water records going back many decades in groundwater assessments. Water rights and use. So how much water and who owns it, who has the rights to use it. So our office, as Allison in our water rights and use will detail, keeping track of major water withdrawals, well construction. Our office also oversees dam and levee safety in the state. Some of that overlaps with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, but at the state level, there are a number of dams within our jurisdiction. And then conservancy districts and watershed development commissions. I know this ties in very closely with the work of soil and water conservation districts. We're not going to highlight these today because I know Kristi Johnson in our watershed stewardship section has done programs with SWCDs in the last year and will continue to be a resource in the future. So we're not going to touch on that today, but we do have a lot of information available on our website and such too for conservancy districts. And then community assistance. So community assistance meaning working closely with county and local municipalities on their water use planning. So our office is actually, and there's a list of at that website, and I do have a handout that has all the links that you're going to see here today. We do have a handout available that has all these links in it for you to use. But we have on our website the full list of statutes and rules that govern our activities. So everything that we do ties back to the Indiana Code. And it is, I mean, there are a few main ones that govern most of it, but there are many. So we have stakeholders that we have identified our work and our outreach with. So floodplain property owners and residents, folks living in who own property on public freshwater lakes, groundwater users, people who are drilling the wells, people who own the wells, high capacity pump owners, installers for those, dam owners and engineers, and then, as I mentioned, the local government officials, conservancy districts, and anyone who uses water, right? Which is all of us. We realize how important it is. We share information regularly about the work that we do in our office through a series of email newsletters. We divide that up by stakeholder group. So if there are certain issues that you are or aren't interested in, you can subscribe to our email newsletters that go out somewhere between once a week and once a month typically. And so information about subscribing to all of those. That's one of the ways that we do outreach to our stakeholders. And then one plug that I'll put in here before we move on is that we host a series of open houses throughout the state. So part of our requirement through the legislature is communicating regularly with our stakeholders and being available for local officials. So we do open houses in different areas of the state. We have one coming up next month in Columbus. So if you're in Bartholomew County or any of the counties that touch Bartholomew County, we'd love to see you on April 16th in Columbus. The event, right, is for learning more about the work that we do, answering folks' questions, and sharing some of those resources, similar to what we're going to do today. So if you run into property owners or people in your community who have questions about water and water resources, an open house is a really good opportunity to talk one-on-one with DNR staff and to find out more. So next, first, I should say, I'm going to hand it over to Jordan Smithers, who is in our technical services section, and I'll let him introduce himself here.
Perfect. Hi, my name is Jordan Smithers. I'm with the Technical Service Section in the Division of Water. We are the main permitting section in the division. The main two statutes that we use for permitting are the Flood Control Act and the Lake Preservation Act. The Lake Preservation Act only applies to public freshwater lakes in the northern third of the state. Since this is kind of a statewide audience, I'm going to kind of skip over that for this presentation and just focus on floodplains and floodway permitting, since it applies to the whole state. But if you end up having any questions about lake permitting and stuff, feel free to ask them, and I'm happy to answer them. So our primary statute that we use for permitting is the Flood Control Act and the associated floodplain management rules. The Flood Control Act was instituted decades ago after some significant flooding in the state, and essentially declares that it wants to prevent the loss of lives and property caused by flooding. And the main way that we do that is by preventing any restrictions in the capacity of floodways. The floodway is typically the most dangerous part of flooding during a flood. So if you can see this graphic here, that center part is the floodway, and that outer part in between the dotted lines is what we call the flood fringe. The whole area is the floodplain, but we only have jurisdiction in that center floodway part. And the way that that's developed is essentially, after they use computer modeling to find that base flood elevation, they start artificially filling in from the edges until they reach a certain elevation. In Indiana, it's 0.14 feet above that base elevation, and that's where they draw those boundaries at. So inside of that is our jurisdiction, and that's just the part that is required to convey floodwaters. So it's the part that's moving, water that's moving rapidly and is usually pretty deep during a flood, and is the most dangerous part. So you can see this is kind of a different view of it. This is what it would look like on any of our mapping services. That striped area is the floodway. The solid blue area is the flood fringe, and then there's that little bit of pink, which is actually what sometimes called the 500-year, but we usually call the 0.2% flood. So you even worse conditions. Some communities will regulate to that. We do not. Within that striped area is DNR permitting, and within that solid area is a local permitting. Every stream in the state that has a drainage area of greater than 1 square mile has a floodway. They are not always mapped. When they are not mapped, we can map them, but they still have a floodway. The easiest way to figure out where that floodway is to ask us. We have a tool for that I'll go through in a little bit on how to request that mapping. But any construction within that area requires a DNR permit. Typically that's excavation, fill, and then maintaining a structure, but it could be anything. Bank stabilization, is essentially fill, but in any construction activity, that being said, there are a number of exceptions to that any construction activity. They're divided into general licenses and exemptions, which are functionally the same thing. They're called general licenses when they're in the rules and exemptions when they're written into statute, but they function basically the same way. Some of them can be done without notice to the department. Some of them require notice, both general licenses and exemptions. They have specific requirements, and as long as those requirements are met, then you don't need a permit from the DNR. The only exception being some of them require a written notice, such as these common examples. Wetland restoration requires a written notice to DNR, and we will essentially issue a letter saying, yes, you meet the exemption. Most generalized exemptions don't have that, though. It's kind of up to the person doing the work to determine if they meet it or not. Other common examples include logjam removal. It's kind of a convoluted exemption. We have a kind of a flowchart guide to walk people through that exemption, where they can just say, kind of follow yes or no as they get to each part and help themselves determine. Most agricultural and kind of park-related activity doesn't require an exemption, as far as just maintaining crops or parks, planting trees, mowing, planting crops, that kind of thing. Any structures would require permits, but general maintenance doesn't. And then outfall structures, for tiles or for stormwater, also have a general license. And there's a whole page of general licenses we have on our website that lists all of them. There's too many to name here. But if you have any specific activities you're curious about, if we have a general license, happy to take those questions. Moving on, I'll talk a little bit about what resources we have available to yourselves and to the general public. So obviously, the Division of Water homepage is where everything we have lives. You can get to pretty much anything. It's not the most intuitive always to find stuff from that homepage, but it's all there somewhere. The main things that we have in the technical services section that we provide to people are what's called the Online Research Center. This is a ArcGIS online tool where you can see previous permits that we've issued. You can view the floodplains. You can look at the statewide LiDAR data, all kinds of stuff. It's got a pretty deep level of detail that's not always useful for the general public. It's mostly for research. When people are like applying for permits and stuff, if they're trying to figure out what else has been done in the area. Our database that we use for permitting is online and is publicly accessible. Also, not very intuitive. We're working on a new one right now, actually. So I haven't really put anything about either of those in here, because for most of the public, they're not that useful. The ones that are really useful are the Waterways Inquiry Tool and the Indiana Floodplain Information Portal. So the Indiana Floodplain Information Portal is where I usually send people when we get asked, I'm looking at this property that I want to buy, or I own this property and someone told me that there's a floodplain on it. How do I see that? How do I know if I'm in the floodplain? They can go to this tool, and it will present them a view like this. There's a disclaimer that pops up before this that they have to click through. They just have to accept that, this is like a digital projection. It's not necessarily perfect, etc. On this page, you can either type in that top left corner address or coordinates that they're interested in, or they can just zoom into their site. And eventually, as they get closer and zoom in, these floodplain layers will start popping up. This picture shows an area around Evansville. I chose this because you can see all these stripe areas that I said were floodway, but they're all different colors. There are different types of studies that can be done to determine those floodways with different levels of detail. Functionally, on a regulatory perspective, they're all the same. They're all the floodway. Anytime something's inside of that striped area, it needs a permit. So zooming a little further to a specific area, these little dots will start to pop up. Those are called floodplain elevation points. And clicking on those will pop up this little box, and that water surface elevation 1 that's WSEL1 on there. It's water surface elevation, and then the 0 1 is 1% annual chance flood. So that's your base flood elevation. That's what we're using for all of our regulation. That's what FEMA uses, and that's what the locals will use. From there, you can choose this little gear-shaped icon in the top left, and it will pop up this FARA report generator. And this is what people can use to get kind of a report of the floodplain on their property, and it's also what can be used to request us to do that modeling if it's on an unmapped stream. So you'll open this up, choose the little icon next to the trash can, and that will allow you to place a point on the map, and it will pop this little output. It will think for a while. It might fail a couple times. You might have to try a couple times, but eventually you will get this link to this INFIP report, and it will pull up a PDF that takes a snapshot of that floodplain on the property. It will provide base flood elevation, an approximate ground elevation based off of LiDAR, a legend for that floodplain map, some general kind of permitting information, and who their local floodplain administrator is. On the second page of that, which is on the right, down at the very bottom, just above that box, is a link. Copy and paste that link into a browser, and that is how you request for us to do modeling on an unmapped stream. Or if you even think, if it is mapped, but you think it's wrong or they think it's wrong, they can use that to dispute it, and we'll re-review it. And sometimes it happens. Sometimes just the wrong file gets uploaded, and so those dots have the wrong elevation or something. That's how we'll fix that kind of stuff. But sometimes, they have a survey that has better elevation data in the LiDAR, and all that kind of stuff we can take into account to re-review these floodplain areas. And then the other tool I'll run through really quick. This is a joint tool with DNR and IDEM. This is what I point people to when they just want to know, do I need a permit? Go into this tool, they can essentially draw their project area on this map, put in a general project description, and then kind of fill out some general site location information. Any other contact they've had, if they've talked to their local and they told them to use this, or if they've talked to the Army Corps and that kind of stuff. Just a bunch of background information to help us determine if they need a permit. But as they fill this out, eventually that'll come to us. And once it comes to us within 14 days max, but typically a lot shorter than that, they will get a response, something like this, both from DNR and from IDEM, saying, yes, you need a permit and what permits they need, or no, you don't need a permit. And then it will have some specific feedback on why that is from both agencies. I don't see any questions in the chat box currently. I think we'll have time at the end if you come up with any, but for now, I'll go ahead and pass it to Allison Mann.
All right, thank you, Jordan. And thanks everyone for having us today. So my name is Allison Mann, and I'm in our Water Rights and Use section in the Division of Water. Our section is kind of different from the rest of the division. We are a regulatory section, but our focus is mainly on the groundwater resources, licensing well drillers. We do have some surface water regulations as well, but also just some more general resource management programs. So I'm just going to talk about a few of our sections programs today, ones that I thought might be most applicable to this group. So I'm going to chat about our well drillers law and water well construction standards. I'm going to give a quick overview of our significant water withdrawal facility registration and water use reporting program. And then also just a real quick overview of our ground and surface water rights laws. So first, just a quick kind of general history of water well driller and pump installer licensing in the state. In 1959, what we call the well drillers law became effective. So this was a law that did have a licensing component to it. At that time, we would actually issue a license for the drilling equipment. So the rig itself would have a license plate affixed to it that was issued by the state. But mainly what the law did at that time was require the submittal of well records to our office. So any well that was drilled, those drillers had to start submitting those records to us. And then in 1988, that law was amended to require actually licensing of the individual rather than the equipment. And then also that at that time, it required us to develop water well construction standards. And I'll talk about those more in the next slide. Then some bills were proposed over the years to require pump installer licensing. Those didn't actually pass until 2010. A bill was proposed and passed requiring the licensing of water well pump installers. And then also with that law came a requirement for both well drillers and pump installers to earn continuing education credits in order to maintain those licenses. So I mentioned the well construction standards. Again, these were developed in 1988, and they establish standards for procedures and materials used for the installation of wells and water well pumping equipment. So here we've got just a diagram kind of demonstrating some of these standards. They have to install so many feet of casing, they have to grout the well has to extend at least a foot above the ground surface. The earth has to be mounted so the water doesn't pool around the well. And the whole intent of these standards is just protection of the groundwater resource. We're not trying to tell the drillers what to do, they know what they're doing. But again, yeah, these are just intended to provide protection of that resource. So some other standards we have are with regard to minimum drawdown requirements for small capacity wells. Depending on the type of well that's been installed, the pump has to be set a certain distance below what's called the static water level. So basically where the water table sits in the well, the pump has to be installed so many feet below that point. So if the well is finished in an unconsolidated aquifer, so talking about like sand and gravel materials, the pump has to be installed at least 20 feet below that static water level. And then if the well is a bedrock well, finished in stone, it has to be installed at least 50 feet below that level. So I mentioned water well records. The drillers are required to submit a record of each well that they install and send it to the Division of Water within 30 days of that well being installed. So the record's going to have information about the well location, the owner, the depth of the well, materials used, its construction details, and a log of the formations that they encountered as they drilled. So we currently have about 450,000 records on file, either online or on paper for more recently submitted records that we haven't digitized just yet. But those are all publicly available. So here's just an example of the record that you could generate through our online database, again, and just the type of information that's going to be available on there. So that record was actually generated from our water well record web viewer. So this is a map-based search option. Again, is publicly available. The user can go on and actually search for an address or just zoom in on the map. And as you zoom in, as Jordan mentioned, the stars are aligned and everything is working that day, you'll start to see the well records appear on the map as those blue and green and pink dots. And it is an interactive map, so you can actually click on those points and it'll give you an information bubble, like you can kind of see there on the screen, with just some quick information about the well. And then you can click on that detailed report link to see that full record. Did we have any questions so far? Okay, just kind of switching gears now. I'm going to give a quick overview of our significant water withdrawal facility registration and water use reporting program. So this is required under the Water Resource Management Act. This law was enacted in 1983, and this requires the registration of all what are called significant water withdrawal facilities. And those are defined in the statute as any groundwater withdrawal or surface water withdrawal or combination of the two that is capable of pumping 100,000 gallons of water per day or greater. So that's about a 70 gallon per minute pumping capability. So again, that is in aggregate from all sources by all methods. So a facility might have multiple wells on it, or it might have a well and a surface water withdrawal source. If that capability meets or exceeds that 100,000 gallon per day capability, it's considered a significant water withdrawal facility and has to be registered with our office. And then the law also requires annual water use reporting for all of these facilities. So we've currently got about 4,300 facilities registered, and those represent about 8,000 individual wells and intakes. So here we've got a map showing the location of those throughout the state. The red dots are going to be the well locations, and the blue are surface water withdrawal locations. So that kind of gives an idea of where these facilities are located around the state, the distribution of those. So now thinking about like, what are these facilities using this water for? Here I've got just a quick breakout of, again, the number of facilities and their associated wells and intakes, broken out based on the water use code that it's been assigned. So each facility that we register is going to be assigned one of these 6 codes based on the primary use of water at the facility. They may be using water for multiple purposes, but this is going to be assigned based on that primary use. So I'll go through these real quick. EP is going to be energy production. So thinking about like power plants, maybe geothermal systems. Also coal mining is going to be included in this category. IN is going to be industrial use, so any kind of self-supplied manufacturing, mixed steel plants, also any other type of mining not coal related. IR is going to be irrigation. So that's going to include both crop irrigation and golf course irrigation. MI is miscellaneous, so anything that doesn't fall into the other 5 is going to get lumped into this category. PS is going to be public supply, so of course like utilities, but also any kind of self-supplied like mobile home parks or maybe schools if they have their own wells are going to be in this category. And then RU is going to be rural use, so looking at like livestock uses and also fisheries are going to be included there. So you can see the majority of facilities that we have registered are irrigation facilities. About 2,800 of those registered out of those 4,300 are for irrigation purposes. But when we look at the actual water use that's reported from that category, they only represent about 3 to 4% of the state's total water use each year, which kind of makes sense. They're only pumping, a few months out of the year at most. But then kind of on the flip side, the energy production category, again, those are the big power plants. They use a lot of water, but we've only got about 90 of those registered. But that category represents about 60% of the state's total water use. And I'll talk more about that in the next slide. So again, about 4,300 facilities, 7,500 wells, 1,300 or so surface water intakes. So when we look at the reported water use from these sources, here we've got a breakout for 2023 of the withdrawals made by surface water, groundwater, and then the total for the state. So like I mentioned, the majority of the use is being reported by those surface water sources, about 1.6 trillion gallons reported in 2023. And again, a lot of that coming from that energy production category. It's not necessarily a consumptive use of water. Power plants, they use the water for cooling purposes. A lot of that is getting discharged back to the source, but it's still considered a use that requires registration and reporting to our office.
Hey, Allison.
Yes.
There's a question in the chat regarding your previous slide. What category would a private home well fall into?
So a private home well is likely not going to meet the withdrawal capability threshold, that 100,000 gallon per day capability that would require registration. So it would likely not be something that would be registered and have to report water use under this program.
At least keeping track of.
Right. Does that answer the question? So yeah, about 1.9 trillion gallons total for the state. So again, yeah, majority of that being from surface water sources. So that was kind of what we saw in 2023. Like I mentioned, this law has been in place since 1983. First year of water use reporting was 1985. So we've got almost 40 years of data. So we can see, what kind of trends are we seeing in water use. So here again, that same breakout, total water withdrawals from 85 through 2023. The total is the purple line at the top, and then surface water is the blue, and then groundwater is the red kind of near the bottom. So you can see that total is and historically largely been driven by those surface water withdrawals. And kind of the other thing we see here, kind of a decline in the last 10 or 15 years in total water use. A couple things going on there. We have had several large power plants be taken offline. So that really contributed to that kind of drop off, especially around like 2012 or so, but also just kind of conservation efforts within that industry and industrial uses, switching from coal to natural gas, things that are less water intensive really seems to be kind of driving that decline. Do we have any more questions for that before I move on? Okay, so just real quick, our ground and surface water rights law. We call this the groundwater rights law. This is a law that provides protection for small capacity well owners from impacts due to high capacity groundwater pumping in their area. So here we've got just a diagram kind of demonstrating what's going on in these situations. So on the left, you can see we've got a high capacity pumping well, and then on the right is the low capacity well. So if the high capacity well is pumping and it draws down the water table, it can potentially cause that low capacity well to fail. So typically in these scenarios, what happens, we'll be contacted by the low capacity, and when I say low capacity, it's typically like a domestic well owner. They'll indicate, maybe they're having problems with their well and they think it might be due to someone pumping nearby. So we will come out and actually, we will conduct an investigation, we'll document the water level in their well. And then we'll use that to see, we'll actually see if we can track down the original record of their well. Like I mentioned earlier, that should have information about like where their static water level was originally. So we can see if there has been, kind of a declining or lowering of the water level in their area or not. So if our investigation finds that the failure of their well was due to that high capacity pumping, then that high capacity facility can be held liable to provide what's called timely and reasonable compensation to the owner of that small capacity well. And that is specifically with regard to getting them back in their normal supply of water. So that might mean replacing a pump, or sometimes just lowering the pump even in their well. Sometimes it's installing a new well. Sometimes it's hooking up to city water if it's a reasonable solution. So that's what that law kind of addresses. And the law also does provide the DNR with the authority to restrict high capacity pumping in certain scenarios. Specifically if the high capacity pumping facility was found liable, but they did not provide compensation to the owner, or if the high capacity pumping is shown to be continuing to deplete the aquifer system. So if their withdrawals are continuing to exceed the recharge capability of that aquifer, then we can restrict their pumping at that time. So we've got a groundwater rights law, so it's only fair that we've got surface water rights as well. So kind of similarly, this is a law that provides protection for owners of freshwater lakes against high capacity pumping. And this law has several criteria that have to be met in order to be protected under this law. So first, the lake has to be at least 10 acres in size. It has to be of natural origin, or if it was man-made, it has to have been in existence at least 5 years before the high capacity pumping began. So again, the DNR has to be able to document a significant lowering of the lake level, and that lowering has to be due to high capacity pumping in the area, either directly from the lake or from a high capacity well that's located within a half a mile of that lake. And then that lowering has to result in what's called significant environmental harm. And that is actually going to be determined by someone from our Fish and Wildlife division. So they would go out and conduct an investigation and see if that was all the case in order to be protected under this law. So do we have any other questions so far there?
There is a question. Do you see that?
Yes, Senate Bill 28.
Yep.
Allison's very familiar.
And we should probably repeat the question just so everyone,
Sure.
if they can't see it. So could you talk about how Senate Bill 28 groundwater emergencies would affect this? Is it this particular code? Yes.
I think it would be more 1425-4, the groundwater rights law. 1425-5 would be the surface water. But yes, yeah. So like I mentioned, currently the way the law reads is that protections are provided for impacts on low capacity wells from high capacity pumping. So Senate Bill 28 would basically open up to potentially high capacity on high capacity impacts being protected under this law. How those are going to be evaluated is to be determined, but yes, it would impact this law. Let's see. Another question.
Yep. Another question, how is an owner of a small well able to prove that a high capacity well has impacted their small well pumping ability?
Right. So that's where that's kind of our involvement. So the DNR, we would actually, when we're contacted by a homeowner and they think that their well has been impacted by the nearby pumping, we will actually go out and document the water level in their well. And like I said, we would also gather as much information we could about the area. We would see if we could track down their original, the original record of their well or other records in the area, just to get an idea of, what that water table was like previously before the pumping began, to see if we're able to document that lowering of the level. And see if we can attribute that to that high capacity pumping facility. So we're not secretive about it. We interact with them as well. So we get with them to see, if they were pumping, how much they were pumping, and what kind of the time frame of that pumping, to see if that relates with that person's well failure. And a lot of times the data speaks for itself. It's usually pretty straightforward. It can get more complicated if there are multiple facilities in an area, kind of dividing up that liability. But generally it's pretty straightforward.
Do you want to give some context for how often or how frequently
Sure.
that happens?
So in a typical year, we'll conduct about 150 investigations throughout the state. In a dry year, we get a lot more calls. We might do about 300 investigations a year in a dry year. I'm gonna pass it off to Kristi. Yeah, this way.
Oh, there we go. All right, we are sharing this section of the presentation for water resource assessment. I'm Kristi Cox. I'm a hydrogeologist in our section.
I'm Christina Spielbauer. I'm a geologist in our section.
Our section is non-regulatory. We don't do any permitting, but we are under Indiana code, where we have been charged with continuing assessment of the water resources and allowing us to conduct applied research to improve our understanding of the water resources. These help us examine the knowledge or gather knowledge of the location, the extent, capabilities, and limitations of the water resources in Indiana. We have several different products that we use today, that we use some of our historical products and some in development to come out in the future, and we have some regular ongoing stuff that we're here to share with you today. Those water well records that Allison just shared, the 450,000 records, is the data that we use to create a lot of our mapping products. They give us a pretty good understanding of what's going on subsurface, geology-wise across the state, and a pretty good density of data too. One of our historical products that was created from that water well record database is our aquifer systems mapping project. It was completed from 2002 to 2011. These were created through ArcGIS ArcMap, where we have static maps for each county created. So if you have a county of interest, you can pull it up and see what the aquifer systems located in your county are. You can download the GIS data or the other files related to that county with all the information you might need for regarding the aquifers in your area. This and then the database was also used for our next project Christina's going to talk about.
So another project that we used the data for was potentiometric surface mapping. I don't know the background of everyone in this group, but a potentiometric surface map is kind of like a topographic map of the water underground. It is affected by pressure of confined aquifers because the way we collect the data is by putting in a well. And so that pressure will push the water up. So our measurements will get affected by that. But it's generally a good idea to see what the elevation of the water is under the surface of the ground. And if you cross-reference that with the topographic map, you can get an idea of a minimum of how deep you have to go to reach the water Sometimes that's rather, sometimes it's a little bit deeper, depending on if there's any pressure on the aquifer. But generally looking at the maps can be a great way for you to kind of see what direction the water is flowing underground. It follows the same principles of water likes to go downhill or high to low gradient. So if you look at the map and you see water is about 850 elevation and it's 800 elevation, the water is going to be going from that 850 towards the 800. A lot of times that's towards rivers and streams. And we have this mapped both in the unconsolidated, which is your sands and gravels and clays and soils that are above the bedrock, and also in the bedrock for every county, since those can kind of be separate and have their own properties. So each county in Indiana will have unconsolidated and a consolidated potentiometric map available on our website. And then we are also we're working to take all those individual county maps for potentiometric data and form them into one single bedrock and single unconsolidated map that would be available to use on GIS applications such as the water well viewer that Allison had talked about earlier, and also Indiana map if anyone uses that, but then you can cross-reference that data with other points such as the wells and things like that.
One of our current ongoing projects is our groundwater level monitoring program. We do this in collaboration with the USGS. We have 60 wells in the Division of Water that we manage and take care of. We download the data ourselves quarterly, and we report that data back to the USGS. They host it on their website, which you can see on the screen here, where all those fun dots are, with the big green circles. That is the USGS site. Our data is hosted there, along with, you'll find other states' data too. The Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Water Science Center hosts this, so those states are also included. We download the data quarterly, but it is measured every hour, and so you can pull up data from sites that are in your area or an area you're interested in and look at how the groundwater trends have been over the period of record, and they will vary. We started this program in 2015. Some were converted USGS wells with a longer period of record, and some of them have been established since then. In addition to these quarterly monitored wells, the USGS has real-time wells. This is an example of some data that you would get from a real-time well, and I think this is similar to what the discrete ones or the continuous but not real-time wells would show. But the USGS has a long period of record of doing some groundwater monitoring, and so they're able to establish normal percentiles for the groundwater levels, and you can display how the trends that are going now compare to how they've done historically. And you can see some different seasonal lows and highs, and they're generally normal to have seasonal highs and lows, and sometimes they just go lower or higher than what we would expect. The DNR funds many of the USGS sites that are real-time, even though the USGS fully manages them, but we are like well-integrated partners in water monitoring.
Okay, and so this is just a little brief thing to letting you know that we use these products to help you out if you have questions. So these are available on our website. You can look at our aquifer maps. You can look at our potentiometric maps. You can let people you work with know that these are available, but sometimes it helps to have someone to sort of help interpret and pull all that data together for you, and that is part of what we're here for. The Division of Water as a whole gets lots of questions every day, and they get parsed out to different groups as needed. But if you have questions specifically having to do with water, very common one for us is, I want to buy this property, I would want to build a house and put in a well, but if I put in a well, like, is there even water there? So if you're looking at buying a property for that purpose, you can reach out to our department, give us the address, and we can use our products to pull together basic information from the area. It's not necessarily like very site specific. This is generalized data for the whole state, but it can be really useful for giving you a starting point. And that you can, if you need more information, you can reach out to consultants or whoever you need for more information. We love to help you, so definitely reach out to us if you have any questions having to do with water accessibility. A few other products that we have that we make available include our weekly summary, which is our Indiana Water and Soil Moisture Conditions Report. This is kind of a great snapshot of what water looks like in the state right now. And you can see an example up on the screen. We kind of work our way through kind of past the precipitation and temperatures from the last week. We move into current information, the soil moisture, drought monitor, reservoir levels, groundwater levels, stream gauges. And we provide that data, and we try to have a graphical thing that makes it a little easier to interpret. A lot of times with points on a map with color gradations. And then future, so we also pull information for forecasting on flooding and forecasting on stream gauge levels in general and precipitation and temperatures. And so we pull these from a bunch of different resources, compile it so that it's available for someone to just get a quick look at what's going on in the state. And we also provide at the end all of the resources that we pull that information from. So if you're really interested in the US Drought Monitor, there is a link in there and you can go check it whenever you want. And so they're just great resources for anyone to use, but a quick brief overview if you need it.
The monthly water resource summary is an additional hydrological summary that we provide. And it is done at the end of each month. We look at the past month's precipitation, and we have evaluated that precipitation to create the standard precipitation index. So it's showing you how those precipitation amounts received differ from normal, and that's done on the 1 month, 3 month, 6 month, and 12-month scale. So you can kind of get a longer term view of how precipitation is doing. We also present the US Drought Monitor. We have some analysis on stream flow and groundwater presented, and we also present the Lake Michigan and reservoir levels across the state. This monthly and some of our other past resources, we're hoping to develop further into more interactive web applications through ArcGIS, just to enhance our presence online and make things more interactive and easier for our customers to access the data and understand the data. So hopefully those will be coming soon. We have plans for the voluntary monitoring, the groundwater monitoring program to have a dashboard, lake levels, the aquifer systems that I talked about at the beginning, those will be going onto a story map, and then combining the potentiometric surface layers into statewide viewing. And then also to remind you that we have these recurring products, the weekly and monthly sources, and you can subscribe to the weekly along with our other newsletters on our website. And that is all we have. I don't know where we want to get.
So any questions? Now's your chance when we have this wonderful group of very expertise, lots of expertise, I should say, with the Division of Water. So please feel free to drop questions in the chat box. Okay, I see one from Toby. Can you guys see that?
I do. So the bill passed to give landowners tax incentives for certifying their wetland to wildlands. That is not something that we can answer within the Division of Water. We all wetlands are the jurisdiction of IDEM, the Department of Environmental Management. That being said, obviously a lot of wetlands overlap with floodways and streams. So we tag in IDEM whenever any of our projects are going to impact wetlands, but we don't handle that. If maybe
Position, maybe.
there are several other DNR divisions who would potentially be involved. I'll get back to you, okay? I'll find the right person to let you know who at DNR handles that. Any other questions? I'll just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, so I'm just kind of curious, this email address here, is that a good email address to give out to the public if they have these questions about these water
Yeah.
you guys deal with then? Yeah.
Yes, so water inquiry goes into, a main inbox that then gets distributed to the appropriate person in the division. So as you got a taste of today, just 3 of the 10 different sections that we have within the Division of Water. We have about 75 full-time staff working mostly out of central office, but some, throughout the state as well. But using water inquiry guarantees that that's the fastest way to get to the right person. Some of our sections have, their own individual emails and stuff, but that water inquiry will get you to the right person the quickest.
So then that kind of leads me to think, what are the most common questions you receive then through that?
Yeah, so we were kind of joking yesterday a little bit that one of the most common questions we receive is about gold panning, which, has very little to do with what we actually do, but is on the minds of many Hoosiers. So there, we get a lot of questions that we can immediately sort of push to direct folks to those like the general licenses and exemptions, things like, log jams on people's property. As Christina mentioned, people regularly asking, if I dig a well, am I gonna reach water? How do I know? I would say for our permitting section, it's like, oh, I'm thinking of buying a property, but I know there's floodplain on it. How does that restrict the work that I do? Those are some of the common ones that I'm thinking of. Do you guys have other?
Why is my well dry?
Why is my well running dry? Yes.
Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's them. It depends.
Yeah. We have a compliance section with inspectors throughout the state. And part of what they do is public education. They are available to meet with property owners. They go out to the site to look at issues. They are receiving questions like, farmers who are experiencing a lot of stream bank erosion, or the stream is moving, especially in southern Indiana, where we have these mobile streams where there's fluvial erosion. Our inspectors are meeting with folks out on their properties to strategize about what they can do, what they can and can't do with or without a permit, and tapping in, IDEM or the Army Corps of Engineers too as needed, or meeting with SWCD folks. We are often fielding the question of, do I need a permit to do X, Y, Z? We know that can be challenging to navigate, as Jordan alluded to, there are a number of exemptions, but you still have to follow certain rules to make that happen. Do I need to hire an engineer to design this project, or can I do it myself? Those are a lot of the day-to-day conversations that we are having with folks, toward that ultimate goal of protecting lives and property. So, we often hear from folks, I haven't seen it flood like that, or my property doesn't flood like that, even, that's what's mapped on the property. And we as a state agency are looking at cumulative impacts, permitting projects that may or may not cause an increase in floodwaters, but keeping track of those cumulative impacts so that we're protecting people both upstream and downstream. And in the same way, for high capacity water withdrawals, having an overall view of what's happening at the state and an understanding of managing that resource for the benefit of everyone and protecting both the natural resource and the people who depend on it. So.
Any other questions? I do not see any in chat, but want to give everybody another second or two to do that. Just a reminder that we are recording this session and I will be posting it on the IASWCD.org website under resources. So it will be there for you to view along with the slides. And you can refer back to that, of course, share it out with anyone you think it might be helpful for. And I want to thank our presenters today. Thank you so much to the 5 of you for putting your time and energy into this presentation. Wow, it's packed full of information. I'm really excited to have it to share and to have for viewing later. And so I just appreciate you guys coming together and doing that for us today.
Yeah, we're happy to do it. Nodding heads around the room. We're happy to do it. And we know that you know, our SWCD partners, folks around the state are often the ones meeting with people and can connect them to some of these resources and direct them to us if they have further questions. We want everybody to be getting good information and you know, checking those maps when because the information is there for you, but also, you know, if you have more questions or not confident in interpreting the information, that you can always direct people our way too.
And as Jen mentioned earlier in the presentation, there is a list, a PDF that has all the links that were talked about in the presentation today. So I'll make sure I put that PDF with the recording so you'll have access to that as well. It's also here in the chat if you want to grab it now, but I will also post that. All right, well, thanks again. Thanks everyone for joining us. And anytime you have another topic you would like to hear more about, like I said, I'm planning to do more lunch and learns for the SWCD audience throughout the year. So if you would like to throw out any topics or speakers, let me know and I'll be happy to work on those for you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.